Okay, folks, ready to dive into something a little bit different today.
Always up for a deep dive.
Yeah. So we're tackling minarchism. And I know that might sound a bit intimidating, right? Political philosophy isn't everyone's cup of tea,
It's
but
gonna be a little dense.
yeah, exactly. But trust me, this is going to be fascinating. We're going to strip it down to the core and see what it's all about.
Right.
And yeah, I think you'll be surprised how interesting this can be. So basically, imagine a world with the absolute minimum amount of government, like just enough to keep things running smoothly. Intrigued?
Definitely.
Good. Let's dive in. So when we talk about minarchism, we're talking about a really, really tiny government, right?
Absolutely. We're talking about a government that's focused on just a handful of key things.
Okay, like what?
Protecting individual rights, enforcing contracts, and making sure the justice system works.
So like police courts and national defense.
Basically.
Yeah,
And that's it.
pretty much. Wow. Okay, I gotta admit, I'm already a little skeptical. Could this actually work in the real world? What about things like public safety or taking care of the environment? Would we just have to rely on private companies for everything?
Yeah, those are all big questions, and they're at the heart of the debate around minarchism. I mean, it's a pretty radical departure from what we're used to, right?
Right.
But think about it this way for a second. Instead of having the government set all these rules about the environment, imagine if people and communities could sue polluters directly for damages.
Hmm.
It kind of flips the script, right?
Yeah.
It gives people the power to protect their own environment and makes companies really accountable for their actions.
Okay. I can see how that might work in theory, but wouldn't that just end up favoring the wealthy? I mean, someone with more money could hire better lawyers and basically get away with anything?
That's definitely a common critique of minarchism, and it raises this big question of fairness and how everyone can access justice. Some people who support minarchism suggest things like voluntary arbitration or mediation, where you settle disputes outside of the regular court system to make legal processes cheaper and easier for everyone to use.
So basically, instead of having tons of government regulations, we'd have a system of individual lawsuits and private agreements.
Yeah, in a way.
It feels like a pretty big gamble.
Well, yeah, it definitely requires a different way of thinking about how society works.
For sure.
You know, if you think back to the early days of the American colonies before there was a strong central government, communities had to rely on themselves a lot more. They used self-governance and private initiatives to deal with a lot of their needs. Minarchists often look back at these historical examples as proof that a minimalist approach to government can actually work.
That's a really interesting point. I'm starting to see how this minimal government idea isn't just some abstract theory, but something that has roots in real historical precedents. But could it actually function in our world today? I mean, things are so complex now.
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And there are definitely potential problems that people point out. A big one is the risk of market failures, which means that essential services might not be provided adequately by private companies because there's not enough profit in it for them.
Right.
Like, imagine a situation where a private fire department refuses to put out a fire because the homeowner hasn't paid their subscription fees.
Yeah, that's a scary thought.
Exactly. And that's one of the big criticisms of minarchism.
So how would monarchists respond to that kind of scenario?
They'd probably argue that competition in the market would prevent that kind of thing from happening.
Okay.
So if one fire department tries to take advantage of people, another company would pop up and offer better, more reasonable services.
Right.
It's this idea that the free market, driven by supply and demand, can regulate things better than a central government can.
Okay, so the key is competition. But what about something like national defense? Would we really rely on private armies to protect the entire country from a major threat? That seems a little unnerving.
I know, right? It sounds like something out of a movie. But yeah, it's another area where minarchism faces serious criticism. But people who support minarchism often look at examples like Switzerland, which has maintained a strong defense, even though it has a pretty small and decentralized government. They believe that a mix of professional, private security firms, volunteer militias, and alliances with other countries could work together to provide strong defense without having a huge standing army.
Interesting. This is honestly pretty mind-blowing. It's making me realize that minarchism isn't just about, like, shrinking the government. It's about completely rethinking how society could function.
It really is. It
Yeah.
makes us think about what's truly necessary for a society to work and whether those things could be done better through individual initiative and cooperation rather than having everything controlled from the top down.
It's a huge question.
Yeah.
And I think it's one that all of us should be thinking about. So to everyone listening, if you were designing a minarchist society, Where would you draw the line? What are the absolute minimum things that you believe a government has to do, and what would you be okay with leaving to the private sector? What compromises would you be willing to make? There's no easy answer, but it's definitely something worth considering. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive, folks.
Absolutely. Thanks for listening.